Chronicon Mundi.
Dive deep into history.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. We're continuing our journey through the history of global jihad, and today we are diving headfirst into the third wave. This is a period that really changes everything. We're talking about territorial control, state building, and a level of brutality that was, frankly, unprecedented.
That's right. This deep dive is going to focus squarely on the years between 2003 and 2017. It's an era that is completely defined by the rise, the reign, and the eventual territorial collapse of the Islamic State, or ISIS. Some call it Daesh.
Right.
We're going to trace how it went from this, relatively small terror group into a self-proclaimed caliph controlling land the size of Great Britain.
And crucially, we're not just looking at what they did, but the very specific, and I think you'd agree, disastrous political conditions that even made that possible.
Exactly. You can't understand ISIS in a vacuum.
Okay, so let's set the stage. The story of this wave doesn't start with some grand ideological breakthrough. It starts with a geopolitical event, the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq. And our sources point to, a profound irony here.
A massive irony. Because before 2003, Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, was probably one of the most hostile places on earth for the kind of Salafi jihadism that Al-Qaeda represented.
People might find that surprising. Didn't Saddam launch a faith campaign in the 90s to seem more religious?
He did, yes. And that's a key bit of context. He increased state funding for mosques. He brought some Islamist academics into the fold. It's actually how a young Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi got his start at the Saddam University for Islamic Studies. But, and this is the critical part, Saddam's security state was absolutely ruthless.
So state-sponsored religion was okay, but any independent political Islam was a threat.
A threat to be eliminated immediately. Anyone pushing for a global jihad, anyone questioning the Ba'athist state, they were on a kill list. The regime was fundamentally secular and nationalist. It didn't tolerate any competition, especially from these radical Sunni groups.
So there was no fertile soil for bin Laden's ideas to take root?
None at all. The combination of state repression and, this strong Iraqi nationalism meant that Al-Qaeda's message just didn't land with most Sunnis. The state was designed to prevent these kinds of networks from ever forming.
Which brings us back to that tragic irony you mentioned.
Yes. The U.S. justification for the war, or a big part of it, was built on the claim that Saddam did have links to Al-Qaeda. They pointed specifically to one man, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi.
Colin Powell at the UN, right. Holding him up as the smoking gun, the link between Baghdad and Al-Qaeda.
Exactly. He was presented as the living proof of this connection. But we know now, from the 9/11 Commission report and other sources, that the premise was, and I'm quoting here, ludicrous. There was no credible evidence of a link. In fact, Al-Qaeda commanders later confirmed that Saddam was a secular enemy, and their operatives had to hide from his secret police just to survive in Iraq.
So the invasion didn't dismantle a jihadist allied state. It did the opposite. It created the perfect environment for one to grow.
It shattered the container. And that leads us to the single most catastrophic variable, the one decision that turned Iraq into the heart of this third wave, the complete and total dismantling of the Iraqi state in 2003.
You're talking about the de-Baathification decrees.
De-Baathification, which was CPA Order Number 1, and just as critically, CPA Order Number 2, which formally dissolved the entire Iraqi military.
Let's just pause on the scale of that for a moment. This wasn't just firing a few generals.
No, this was the complete erasure of the state's security and administrative core. Overnight, you had somewhere between 350,000 and 400,000 trained, armed soldiers and officers, suddenly unemployed.
And angry.
Humiliated, and crucially, in possession of all their military skills. On top of that, de-Baathification purged tens of thousands of civil servants, doctors, engineers, teachers, anyone with a senior Ba'ath Party membership. It didn't just empty offices. It destroyed the institutional spine of Sunni society.
You've created a vacuum of power and a massive pool of resentful, skilled men.
Precisely. And that is the vacuum that Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the very man the U.S. had falsely accused of being there, was about to pour into.
Okay, so that takes us squarely into phase one of this wave, the birth of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI, and Zarqawi's brutal sectarian pivot from 2003 to 2006.
Right. And to understand AQI, you have to understand Zarqawi himself.
Yeah.
He was nothing like the Al-Qaeda old guard.
Not the educated, wealthy ideologue like bin Laden.
Not at all. Zarqawi was a poor, uneducated Jordanian street thug. He came from a background of petty crime. He found radicalism in prison. He was this unpolished, ferocious, hands-on brawler, and that persona gave him immense credibility with a new, angrier generation of Sunni youth who felt left behind.
He had street cred.
He had street cred, and he had operational expertise. After 9/11, when Al-Qaeda's central leadership was on the run, he was the one on the ground getting things done.
So his initial group, Al-Tawhid, was Al-Jihad, becomes this magnet in the chaos of post-invasion Iraq.
It just explodes in size and influence. It absorbs fighters, money, and momentum until it formally merges with Al-Qaeda Central and becomes AQI. And suddenly, Iraq, not Afghanistan, is the new dynamic center of global jihad.
But this merger came at a huge ideological price. It created a deep, deep schism in the movement. This is the whole far enemy versus near enemy debate.
Yes, and this is absolutely critical to understand ISIS's DNA. For years, bin Laden and Zawahiri had a clear strategy: focus on the far enemy, America. The idea was if you hit the U.S. hard enough, they'll pull out of the Middle East, and then local groups can take over.
Zarqawi flipped that completely on its head.
He inverted it. He said, no, the near enemy is the real threat. And for him, that meant the Shia. He saw the Shia population and their backer, Iran, as this treacherous fifth column that was even worse than the Americans. His priority was to wipe them out first.
And this wasn't just talk. This was his entire operational playbook in Iraq.
It was his manifesto. He unleashed this horrific campaign of mass casualty suicide bombings targeting Shia civilians, mosques, markets, religious pilgrimages. He was deliberately trying to provoke a sectarian civil war.
What was the strategic logic behind that? It seems designed to alienate the population.
His logic, which he laid out in his own writings, was that the Sunnis were asleep. They didn't see the danger. He believed that only by making the Shia threat, quote, imminent and undeniable, could he awaken them and force them to rally to his banner. He had to create so much chaos that neutrality was no longer an option.
So how did Al-Qaeda Central, bin Laden, and Zawahiri react to this? This was a flagrant violation of their strategy of not killing other Muslims en masse.
They were horrified. Privately, they were absolutely panicking. We have letters from Zawahiri to Zarqawi just begging him to stop the slaughter of Shia civilians. He argued it was reckless, counterproductive, and, as he put it, it lifted the burden from the Americans by turning Iraqis against each other instead of against the occupation.
So if they were so against it, why on earth did they approve the merger? Why not just cut him loose?
Because they were trapped. Zarqawi was the only game in town. He was running the most effective, high-profile jihadist franchise in the most important country in the Arab world. They needed a presence in Iraq to stay relevant.
So the merger was basically on Zarqawi's terms.
Entirely. He retained his operational independence. AQC got the brand recognition, but Zarqawi got to keep doing whatever he wanted. So publicly, they had to praise him and call his project blessed, but privately, they knew they had lost control. This strategic initiative had passed to this reckless, insubordinate Jordanian thug.
And that tension is the legacy he leaves behind when he's killed by a U.S. airstrike in 2006.
Exactly, which brings us into phase 2. This murky transitional period from 2006 to around 2013, when the group rebrands as the Islamic State in Iraq, or ISI.
After Zarqawi's death, the group is on the back foot. This is the era of the American Surge, the Sunni Awakening, the Sawa forces.
Right. ISI is under immense pressure. They're losing fighters. They're being pushed out of their strongholds. They start to function less like an army and more like a mafia-like network. Just hit-and-run attacks, assassinations, trying to survive.
But during this period of weakness, they do something incredibly audacious. They declare an Islamic State, an emirate.
They do. And this flew directly in the face of Al-Qaeda Central's long-term patient strategy. AQC's whole idea was to stay underground, wage a long war, and not expose yourself by trying to hold territory.
And we know how bin Laden felt about this because of the documents recovered from his compound in Abbottabad.
Those documents are just fascinating. They give us this incredible window into the thinking at the very top. Bin Laden, writing not long before he was killed, is explicitly warning his followers not to do what ISI did. He says rushing to declare emirates is putting the cart before the horse.
Because the U.S. will just crush you.
Precisely. He uses ISI as the prime example of what not to do. He says they were impatient, they exposed themselves, and now they're paying the price.
So he was furious, but publicly.
Publicly, total support. Zawahiri keeps praising ISI as theologically legitimate. They couldn't afford to admit that their own affiliate had gone rogue and ignored their strategic advice. It showed how little actual control they had.
Okay, so ISI is weak, it's isolated, its strategy is being condemned by bin Laden himself. Logically, it should have collapsed. But it didn't.
It didn't. And the reason it survived and ultimately came roaring back has almost nothing to do with its own strength and everything to do with the epic political failure of the new Iraqi state.
This is the core insight of this whole deep dive, isn't it?
It is the political oxygen that revived a dying movement. ISI's comeback was fueled entirely by the actions of one man, Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki.
Let's drill down on that. What specifically did Maliki do after 2010 that created this opening?
He systematically consolidated power in a way that was deeply sectarian and authoritarian. For long stretches, he was not only prime minister, but also the acting interior minister and the acting defense minister. He controlled everything.
And he created his own personal security forces.
Yes, this was crucial. He set up these special military brigades, better equipped and better paid than the regular army, that reported directly to his office. They completely bypassed the normal chain of command.
And people started calling them something pretty chilling.
They called them Fedayeen al-Maliki, a direct callback to Saddam's infamous paramilitary squads. It sent a very clear message. He was also packing the courts and the security services with his own loyalists. He was hollowing out the very institutions that were supposed to protect the state.
And this power grab was aimed squarely at the Sunni community.
Absolutely. This wasn't just politics. It was a campaign of disenfranchisement. He launched mass arrests of former Baathists who had been brought back into the government. He issued these very public arrest warrants for high-profile Sunni politicians, like the Vice President Tariq al-Hashimi, on what most people saw as trumped-up terrorism charges.
So for the average Sunni, the message from Baghdad was clear. You are not welcome in this new Iraq.
It was worse than not welcome. You were the enemy. And then came the ultimate betrayal. He turned his back on the Sawa forces, the Sons of Iraq. These were the Sunni tribesmen who'd been paid by the U.S. to fight and defeat AQI. They had risked everything.
And Maliki just cut them off.
Refused to pay them, refused to integrate them into the security forces. He basically told them, thanks for your help, now go away. This created this profound sense of betrayal and, more importantly, a huge security vacuum in Sunni areas.
And when the Sunnis tried to protest this treatment peacefully,
that's when things really turned. You had the Day of Rage protests in 2011, not just about politics, but about the total failure of basic services. No electricity, no clean water. Maliki's response was brute force. His security forces opened fire on demonstrators. A tribal leader was quoted at the time saying Maliki was worse than Saddam.
Because he destroyed any hope of a future within the state.
Exactly. And this is the pivot point. This political environment created the social base ISIS needed to survive. It's not that a majority of Sunnis suddenly became believers in Salafi jihadism. It's that ISI became the only viable instrument for revenge against a hostile, sectarian, Iran-backed government in Baghdad.
The Ba'athist officers, the tribal leaders, the disenfranchised young men, they didn't turn to ISIS for salvation, but for firepower.
They saw it as the only effective tool they had left. Maliki's politics, not ISIS's ideology, was the engine that powered the Caliphate's return.
And that engine was about to get a supercharger from the chaos breaking out right next door. This brings us to Phase 3, the Syrian catalyst, starting around 2011.
Right. The Arab Spring starts with this, huge wave of optimism. But in places like Syria, it quickly descends into chaos. The state starts to break down, creating this massive power vacuum.
And Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who's now the leader of ISI, sees an opportunity.
A golden opportunity. He sees Syria as the perfect place to rebuild, to get strategic depth, and to re-energize the movement away from the pressure in Iraq.
So he sends his lieutenants into Syria.
He sends one of his most trusted commanders, a man named Abu Muhammad al-Julani, to establish a Syrian franchise, and they call it Jabhat al-Nusra. But their initial strategy is one of pure deception. The Arabic term is taqiyya.
So they're hiding your true identity.
Completely. They never mention Al-Qaeda or ISI. This is a very clever two-pronged strategy. First, they kept them off the U.S. drone target list. If they had announced Al-Qaeda is in Syria, they would have been hit immediately.
And second?
Second, it allowed them to blend in with the local Syrian opposition. They got funding and weapons from Gulf states who thought they were just another rebel group fighting Assad. They basically grew their strength under a false flag until they were too powerful to ignore.
A brilliant strategy. But eventually, Baghdadi wants to claim his prize.
He does. In April 2013, he makes this huge unilateral announcement. He declares that ISI and Jabhat al-Nusra are dissolved, and they are now merged into one single entity, the Islamic State of Iraq and Washam, ISIS. He's claiming ownership of the entire project.
Which Julani, the leader of al-Nusra, immediately rejects.
He rejects it outright, and this triggers what's basically an intra-jihadist civil war. You have thousands of the world's most skilled jihadists now killing each other across Syria.
And ISIS wins.
ISIS wins. They are more ruthless, better organized, and they eventually seize key territory, including the city of Al-Raqqa, which becomes their de facto capital. And it's important to note who they fought first. Their priority wasn't Assad. It was eliminating all their other Islamist rivals. They wanted total ideological control.
So with their Syrian flank secure, they were ready to launch the 2014 blitzkrieg back into Iraq, the attack that shocked the world.
And that military success was not just down to religious fervor. This is where the Ba'athist connection becomes absolutely critical.
The former Iraqi army officers?
The thousands of them that Maliki had pushed out. Men like Haji Bakr, a former colonel in Saddam's intelligence service who becomes Baghdadi's top strategist, or Abdul Rahman al-Balawi, another former officer who becomes head of the military council. These guys provided the professional military blueprint.
They brought the statecraft, the intelligence know-how.
They brought the discipline. We found documents later, plans drawn up by Haji Bakr years in advance with meticulous diagrams of how to infiltrate towns, how to set up intelligence networks, how to exploit tribal divisions. It was Saddam's secret police methodology repurposed for a jihadist state.
And their crown jewel, their primary target, was Mosul, Iraq's second largest city. Its fall in the summer of 2014 was a seismic event.
It was a global humiliation. You had an ISIS force of maybe a few thousand fighters at most, and they were facing an Iraqi army that was, on paper, over 60,000 strong in the city.
An army trained and equipped by the United States.
Equipped with billions of dollars of U.S. hardware.
Yeah.
And they just shattered. The sources describe it as a house of glass. The Iraqi soldiers literally threw off their uniforms, abandoned their tanks, their Humvees, their artillery, and they just ran.
Why? How does a force that large just evaporate?
A toxic combination of corruption, sectarianism, and failed leadership. Maliki's cronyism meant that many of those 60,000 soldiers were ghost soldiers, names on a payroll that didn't exist, with commanders pocketing the salary. Morale was zero. The Shia commanders had no trust from their Sunni troops. When a smaller but highly motivated and ruthless enemy attacked, the entire structure just dissolved.
And ISIS inherited a massive arsenal overnight.
A massive arsenal. They were suddenly one of the best equipped armies in the Middle East. And with the fall of Mosul, the stage was set. In June 2014, from the Grand Mosque in Mosul, Baghdadi declared the restoration of the Caliphate. Al-Dawla al-Islamiyya. The Islamic State was born.
Which leads us into our final phase for this deep dive. The structure of the Caliphate itself, its ideology, and its global impact from 2014 to 2017. Let's start with that ideology. It was so performatively savage.
It was. And that was by design. At its core, it's a millenarian ideology, an end-times death cult. They truly believe they are setting the stage for the final battles of history. The very name of their main magazine, Dabiq, refers to a town in Syria where an Islamic prophecy says the final battle between Muslims and the Romans, or the West, will take place.
So this belief in a looming apocalypse justifies everything.
It justifies imposing this incredibly narrow, brutal, and frankly obsolete interpretation of Islamic law. They essentially reduce the complexity of a 1,400-year-old faith down to just war-making and punishment. And the brutality itself was a strategic tool.
It was performative slaughter, as the sources put it.
Exactly. The mass executions, the beheadings, burning people alive, it was all filmed and professionally produced for a reason. It was designed to terrorize their enemies, project an image of unstoppable power, and attract the most violent and fanatical recruits from around the world. It was a form of ritual purification.
And nowhere was that more horrifyingly clear than in their systematic use of sex slavery.
This was one of their most radical breaks with even other jihadist groups. They didn't just tolerate it, they celebrated it. They boasted in their own magazines about enslaving Yazidi women, creating a whole theological justification for it. They even set up a bureaucracy, a department of war spoils, to manage the sale of women with notarized contracts.
It was a recruiting tool.
It was absolutely a recruiting tool. For a certain type of disaffected young man, the promise wasn't just paradise after death. It was power, conquest, and sexual entitlement right now.
It's a horrifying picture. But here's the paradox. Alongside this ideology of savagery, they were actually trying to build a state.
And that's what made them so much more dangerous than Al-Qaeda. AQC was a network. ISIS was building a government. They weren't just nihilists, they were administrators. They understood that to hold territory, you had to provide services.
What kind of services are we talking about?
In places like Raqqa and Mosul, they set up a surprisingly functional bureaucracy. They had traffic police. They had courts that, while brutal, delivered swift justice. They had consumer watch. It was a marriage of convenience, and the honeymoon was very short. The ISIS ideologues held the Baathists in contempt. They called rival Baathist rebel groups the devious Baath. As soon as Mosul was secure, ISIS began purging the very same former army officers who had helped them take it. They would use their skills, but they would never tolerate a rival for power or authority.
Beyond its territory, the Caliphate posed a truly global threat, mainly through its success in recruiting foreign fighters.
The numbers are staggering. By 2016, intelligence agencies estimated that 36,500 foreign fighters from all over the world had traveled to join ISIS, over 6,000 of them from Western countries. Nothing in Afghanistan or the earlier Iraq War even came close. The Caliphate was this incredible magnet for anyone seeking identity, purpose, and a utopian vision.
And for those who couldn't travel, ISIS perfected a new kind of terror, stochastic violence.
This was their most potent global weapon. It's the idea of using mass propaganda to inspire lone wolf attacks without having to plan, fund, or direct them.
They were just putting the idea out there.
Just broadcasting the call to action. Their spokesman would say things like, if you cannot find a bomb or a bullet, then smash an infidel's head with a rock, or slaughter him with a knife, or run him over with your car.
So attacks like Paris in 2015 or San Bernardino.
Many of those were inspired, not commanded. It's a terrifyingly effective strategy. It costs ISIS almost nothing, but it forces Western governments to spend billions on domestic security and creates this pervasive sense of anxiety.
But in the end, that global reach, that sheer recklessness is what brought the whole thing crashing down.
It was completely self-destructive. By beheading Western hostages, attacking Paris and Beirut, and alienating regional powers like Turkey, they achieved the impossible. They united the entire world against them.
Who was in this counter-coalition? It's an incredible list.
You had the U.S.-led coalition, the rebuilt Iraqi army, the Kurdish Peshmerga, Iran-backed Shia militias, and the Russian Air Force, all fighting the same enemy. They were surrounded.
The military pressure must have been immense.
Overwhelming. The U.S. coalition alone launched tens of thousands of airstrikes. And as ISIS started losing territory, especially its oil fields, the financial squeeze began.
How did that affect the people living under their rule?
It turned their state from a service provider into an extortion racket. They started imposing crushing taxes on everything, on crops, on phone lines, on water. They were bleeding the local population dry just to fund their war, which completely eroded any legitimacy they might have had. The invincible caliphate started to look desperate.
So by 2016-2017, with the fall of Mosul and Raqqa, the territorial project was over. What does this deep dive tell us about the legacy of this third wave?
I think it proves that the idea of global jihad had fundamentally evolved. It moved beyond just attacking the far enemy to actually trying to build and hold a state. It showed how a radical group could weaponize sectarianism and feed on the wreckage of failed nations.
And even though the physical caliphate is gone, the ideas, the networks, the model of stochastic violence, those haven't disappeared.
Not at all. The caliphate was defeated, but the movement mutated. It went back underground, it decentralized, and its splinters and successors are already adopting new strategies for survival and resurgence.
And that mutation is exactly where we'll pick up next time, as we explore the complexities and the new realities of the fourth wave of global jihad. Please join us then.